What happened to you when you were young that you didn't understand until years later? When me and my sister were around the ages of 8 and 6, we gave our mom a necklace for her birthday. She was about 36 years old at that time. It was a blue-green twinkling necklace and we thought it was perfect for mom because she loves glitter and jewelry. She wore it at every occasion she had guests for dinner and similar. We were very proud of our gift because she liked it so much that she wore it all the time. Years later I realized that it was an ugly piece of crap. Really, no sane human would wear this dog collar in disguise. I cringed at the thought of actually giving it to mom. Then it clicked. She probably only wore it when she was at the house or we were around. She wore it for us, so that we don't feel guilty of gifting crappy things to her while making a fool out of herself in front of everybody else. I love you, mom. My mom insists her love of clunky necklaces is because she got so used to wearing pasta necklaces my sister and I made for her. She still has one of the more tasteful penne and macaroni pieces in her jewelry drawer 18 years later. When I was about 14, a guy who I went to school with had leukemia. He disappeared from school for a while he had chemo, and then came back when he recovered a little. We weren't particularly close. In fact, there had been a little bit of animosity between us. For no particular reason, just petty kid stuff. The last day of term as I was walking towards the school gate, he caught up with me and walked with me. He told me he was sorry there had been tension between us and that he liked me and hoped we could be friends. He died during the summer break and I realized sometime later that maybe he had known he wasn't going to make it and was trying to make his peace with the world before he went. When I was a little kid, we had a kid in our class named George who was mentally retarded. We had special needs kids in our school, and we wouldn't have them in the same class, but they would share recess with the rest of the kids. George dressed funny, he couldn't speak very well, and he had a hard time understanding what we were telling him. As you might imagine, this led to a lot of the kids excluding him or making fun of him. My friends and I decided to be his friend. He was a nice kid, didn't mean any harm. He was just a bit slow. Years later, in telling the story to someone else, I remembered my teacher explaining that he was Greek, which I didn't understand at the time. Thinking about it, I remembered that just like the special needs kids, the ESL kids shared recess with us. George wasn't retarded. He was just a recent immigrant from Greece who didn't speak English very well. Can confirm, I'm Greek, living in the US. Off the boat, Greeks are pretty much retarded. I found an butt in my dad's closet when I was 6. And butt, looking back on it now, it was probably a sex toy, or just something he made to look like a woman's butt. Either way, I pulled it out of his closet and was sitting next to it on the couch when he got home from work. I was a lonely kid. This made me actually laugh out loud, just chilling with an butt on the couch. Visiting my aunt and her cool roommate Susan when I was a child. Didn't realize until my cousin said something when I was in high school. You mean Haruma? Oh, holy crap. Found out my uncle was gay the same way. LOL. So many birthday cards and holiday cards from Uncle D and his roommate M. Never questioned it really. Thought it was really nice that his roomie signed our cards though. When I was about 7 or 8, I was at a train station with my parents and saw a guy on the opposite platform jump in front of an oncoming train. At the time I didn't really get what was going on and was just really curious to look, but now I understand why we left the station in a hurry. We had a science fair in 6th grade, and I was doing some sleep experiment or something. Being the smartest know-it-all I was, I referred to my subjects as tishties, like trainees, I thought. My teacher politely suggested calling them test takers instead. Years later it dawned upon me, and I have mad respect for him not laughing in my face. I would have. When I was 12, my divorced mother and I lived in a nice duplex in my hometown. She would go to the city after I fell asleep and party downtown with my aunt almost every night. I didn't know this until I was older. One night in particular, I fell asleep on the couch and halfway woke up to the sound of the front door opening and closing. I saw my mom walk in with a creepy, hooded, shadowy figure close behind her. I fell back asleep. The next morning, I asked my mom who was with her when she came home last night. She looked terribly confused. I told her about the figure behind her, and the color drained out of her face, and she shook her head and told me to stop playing games. That if I kept telling ghost stories I would invite malevolent spirits into the house. Found out like a year ago that she brought a guy home and made me believe it was a ghost so I wouldn't tell my grandparents. Crafty B. TL. DR. My mother brought a guy home one night and let me believe for over 10 years that I had seen a ghost. Well, crap. Sometimes we would stop at my aunt's work so that my dad could go in and talk to her. I wasn't allowed in because I was a kid and it was an adult place. The only other things that ever got the descriptor adult were adult films, which were not for kids because of all the sex. So I happily assumed that my aunt worked someplace where all sorts of sex was happening. Years later, I was driving by and noticed that it was a retirement home. This is like the opposite of every other story on this thread. First grade, a girl in my class would always wear a dress to school and the guy sitting next to me would always drop his pencil to take a peek. One day the teacher caught him in the act and sent him to the school shrink. The guy went to a different school a week later. About a month later, the girl moved away. However, that guy ended up in the same high school with me. We ended up in the same gym class and got to talking. He told me that the girl was being raped by the father. He kept dropping his pencil to see the horror show of bleeding. He thought that's how girls were made. They chop off the wiener. He was genuinely curious to see when the bleeding stopped. He was too scared to ask her directly about the chopping. After the school psych figured out he wasn't a peeping Tom, they called the cops on her dad. That's not how I thought the story would end. When I was about 4 or 5 we got 2 very important life-changing bits of medical news. THD first was my baby brother was on the way. The second was that my father was diagnosed with acute lymphoma and had about 2 weeks to live. When I was little I had no grasp of how serious cancer was. My mom told me my dad was sick, but that was about it. I remember my mom kept insisting that I spend time with him, but I would always get angry when he got too tired to play or kicked me out so he could vomit from the chemo. I remember one night in particular where my school had my first back to school night carnival. They had all sorts of rides and stuff. My dad had just had extensive surgery and had staples across his entire neck. I used to joke that he was like Frankenstein. My dad managed to make it through the big presentation the teacher made to the whole class and their parents, but barely. I thought this was boring, but would be worth sitting through because I would get to go on carnival rides afterwards. But my dad had to leave. He couldn't even stand up. I could not understand how my strong 6 feet 4 inches father could be so selfish. If he could sit through the boring part, why not the good part? I to this day feel tremendously guilty over how I treated him and the tantrum I threw when my mom was struggling to hold my dad up and my dad was struggling just to stay conscious. Fortunately the doctors were wrong. He made it well past the 2 weeks and eventually beat cancer 5 years later. It took years before I understood how seriously sick he really was. He had gotten down to 90 pounds, but to me he was still a superman. This is so sad, but I'm glad it has a happy ending. I can't imagine how you felt when you realized what was going on after the fact. We had this gym teacher in elementary school that would bring a bag of apples to class and give the girls one if they'd give him a massage. I was peeved because I absolutely loved apples. Still do. I thought it was unfair that only the girls got apples. So I told my teacher how Mr. So-and-so would only let the girls massage him for apples and we had to do sports. I was not an athletic child, so the idea of eating apples versus gym activities greatly appealed to me. I had to go to the principal's office to tell them my story, which was basically this is balls. Everyone should be getting apples, or no one should be getting apples. Other students corroborated my story and soon enough so-and-so was gone. TLDR, escaped, prevented, and ended potential sexual abuse from a teacher because I love apples. I'm basically picturing you as Butters in this story. My dad was a fairly strict guy, military background, very type A, etc. I was a very outdoorsy tomboy of a girl. As a kid I loved to find caterpillars and build them little homes and find the best flowers for them to eat. And my dad loved this hobby of mine. So much so, he would encourage my caterpillar hunting, which I always though seemed a little weird, but I didn't question it. There were a few plants out by our barbecue in the back that he specifically asked me to keep an eye on. because, as he told it to me, this was the best place to find them. My kid brain just though my dad and I had found a common ground, and that he wanted to help. About 5 years later, as my naiveness started to wear off, I realized my dad was a total pothead. My brother, who is 10 years older than me, was chatting with me about my new realization one day, and that's when it was finally spelled out for me. Those plants that according to my pops were the best place to find my footed worm friends were actually just my dad's pot plants, and he enlisted my help to keep them bug free. TLDR. My dad encouraged me to hunt caterpillars off his pot plants. I just thought he was trying to help me find the coolest bugs to play with. I'm a redhead, but neither of my parents or my brother is a redhead. So when we were out in public when I was young, a lot of people would ask where my red hair came from. One day, when I was probably 6 or so, my parents told me to start answering the question with "from the mailman," which I did constantly cause people always seemed to react to it. It wasn't till I got to high school that it clicked that the mailman in this scenario had not delivered my red hair in an envelope, but that it had come from a much different package. I love that your parents encourage you to do this. It's something most parents would be mortified about, but they clearly thought it was hilarious. They sound like funny people. I'd get erections and I'd pull my pants down and pee long straight lines. I thought they were for peeing long distances. I watched the end of Austin Powers Goldmember when Fat Bastard had lost all his weight and said his neck looked like a vagina. I asked my mother what a vagina was. She said it was a fruit. When I was 6 we used to play a lot with Pokemon cards at school. One recess I left my deck inside the classroom. When I came back my Charizard was missing from it. 3 days later a friend from class came to me and told me he found my Charizard outside in a bush. Took me 10 years to realize he stole it from me and then got cold feet and gave it back. When I was 7 and my brother was 4, a man came up to the backyard where we were playing and asked if we wanted to see the puppy in his van. My brother said yes and started to follow him. I grabbed my brother's arm and screamed very dramatically "no woo" until my parents came out. The man waved at my parents and then drove away. I felt a little embarrassed for overreacting by screaming no like that. Looking back, there is no way he wasn't a creeper. I asked my mom just now if she remembered that, and why she didn't report him to the police to let them know there was a potential kidnapper in the neighborhood. She said because he didn't actually do anything. When I was younger my house was messy and my mum only ever cleaned on special occasions, and that was only certain rooms people were allowed in. I always thought this was completely normal. We had wine boxes holding up our couch and shoved right up our chimney, which was covered by a fire screen. Our kitchen smelled of mold and rotting food. The benches and floors were covered in the source of the smell and other unidentifiable objects. My clothes used to sit in a washing basket so long after they were washed that they would start to grow fuzz. There was one room beside mine which was so overpacked with rubbish and toys that I could barely crack the door open. It was just filthy overall. No one ever saw this though, and if they did I can only imagine that my mum would have lost custody of me immediately, and I think she knew that. I lived like that until I was 12 and I didn't really understand what was happening until recently when watching an episode of Hoarders. It's kind of messed me up. I can't sleep unless my house is spotless and I constantly have panic attacks if I forget to clean something before leaving the house. Got told that grandma had a black eye because she had walked into a door. Okay, grandma. Years later, I realized that grandpa had given grandma a black eye. Grandparents are meant to be all warm and nice and friendly. In kindergarten I had a best friend named Daniel and we played with toy dinosaurs and traded them all the time. January comes around and I invite him to my birthday party I was having at my house. He never showed up that day, and my mom told me that day he wasn't going to be able to make it, as well as he wouldn't be able to come to school again. Little kid me was like, okay, I'll see him later. He died in a car crash on the way to my birthday party. Frick. I hope I'm not late to the party. When I was about 6-7, wish I was looking for bugs in my backyard when I came across a super rare and badass praying mantis. Naturally I scooped it up and put it in my bug container. Later on I was looking for more bugs when I found yet another praying mantis. Lucky day. I was super excited and put it in the container with the other praying mantis. Both of them stood in there dead still and just kind of bobbed around like praying mantis do. I came back a few hours later and was appalled by what I found. The bigger mantis standing there as still as ever right on top of a praying mantis head and legs. I was super spooked. Was that mantis a killer? Did the smaller mantis fall apart or explode? What happened? It really weirded me out for a while. I'd say about 10 or so years later I found out that the female mantis eats the male after sex. I still don't know if I'm an accomplice to a murderer or a world-class wingman. Probably both. When I was around 6-7 years old, my father used to grow these special tomato plants at the back of our garage hidden away from everything. And every time he took me back there I had to be very quiet and not tell the neighbors about them. When I was around 16 something clicked one day and I realized my parents were both growing marijuana. My mom had a serious drug problem my entire life. When I was in high school, I recognized the alcohol addiction. That was new and developed when I entered high school. In college she developed an obvious addiction to painkillers, which killed her when I was 19. I was talking to my dad, and he told me that her drug problems was the main reason for their divorce and why he fought so hard for custody yet still remained so friendly with my mom to be a prominent figure in my life. I was confused, because to me my mom's issues didn't start until I entered high school and she discovered alcohol, and my dad mentioned that he was talking about her addiction my entire childhood. He didn't realize when he said it that I was unaware of it, and he was incredibly upset that he told me that when I didn't know. He hated the idea of hurting my memory of my mom, who, despite her massive frick-ups, I still love. She was my mom. Even looking back now, I'm a bit shocked to learn all this, but it makes a lot of things make sense. When I was little I asked my mom why I was having erections and what they were. She said to me, "Don't worry sweetie, it happens to your father all the time." Looking back I am mortified. In my adolescence, telemarketers frequently called our house. My parents instructed my sister and myself to respond to questions like, "Is your mom dad home with cheesies in the shower?" Well, one summer day when I was 6, we got a telemarketer call. After I explained I was only a child and could subsequently not conduct business for the household, he asked, "Is your mom home?" I said, "Number. She's in the shower. What about your dad?" "He's in there, too." It was not until years later that I realized his sudden embarrassed laughing was caused by me accidentally making this guy think my parents were getting it on in the shower while their poor innocent son was home. I lost one of my teeth when I was 7 years old, and so I was so excited to get money and stuff from the tooth fairy. I put the tooth under the pillow and I was ready to get my prize for losing a tooth. The next morning, I woke up and the tooth was gone but no present. I went and told my dad about how I just got scammed from the tooth fairy and he was like, "OHHHH, the tooth fairy had to run fast so she gave me the money to give to you." He then pulls out his wallet and gives me the $2 that the tooth fairy gave him. I was so happy but still wondered why the tooth fairy was in such a rush. $2. I got 50 cents, dang cheap butt tooth fairy. When I was 6 and my brother was 4, we used to walk to our cousin's house, which was 2 houses down. One evening, we asked our mother if we could go over and she said yes and lets us walk over by ourselves. While we're walking, this car drives up to us and asks if we knew where the nearest McDonald's was and if we'd like to come with him. I told him we weren't allowed to eat McDonald's without our mother's permission, and turned to get her to ask if we were allowed. She was already running outside to get us when the car sped off. I was around 15 when I was reminiscing with my family and she brought it up. Creepy realization. When I would stay at my grandmother's house, I had a bunch of VHS tapes about dinosaurs and stuff that I wanted to watch. Sometimes I'd get to watch them, but only if my grandpa was home. Memo always said you'll have to wait until Pepper gets back. I can't work that VCR. She also had all her soaps recorded on tape, and many times I saw her record them without my grandpa being home. She feigned incompetence so that she didn't have to watch my dinosaur movies, and I never realized it until I was an adult. It is the wise woman who plays the fool. Memo, you sly fox. I've done something similar to the kids I nanny. They have a trampoline and always want me to jump on it with them. Watching 6 kids takes enough of my energy, so I convinced them that I'm terrified to get on so they'd stop bugging me about it. I am 24 years old now and I didn't really realize what happened to my sister and I until about a year ago. We had a neighbor named Bob. Bob was in his 60s with a wife that was very ill. Bob was a nice man who had to take care of his wife who was pretty much dying. My mom trusted Bob. My sister trusted Bob. I trusted Bob. Bob would play games with us. We loved Bob. He would let us come over to his house once his wife was out for the evening. He would let us come over in the afternoon if his wife was asleep. Bob started playing a game with us called the slide game. My sister was about 5 and I was about 8. Bob's only rule was that we could not wear jeans when playing the game. He always talked about how he preferred soft shorts, like cheer shorts. Girls know. Well, Bob would let us sit on his face and slide down all the way to his lap, over and over again. He would also make a motor sound which to us made it more fun. He would breathe hot breath on us as well when we were on his mouth. I honestly didn't even realize this was bad in any way. My mom put a collage together for me a year ago, including a picture of Bob standing with my sister and I. A few memories flooded my head and I was happy, until I thought about this game, and about how he literally molested my sister and I without us or my parents knowing. Children are too innocent. In lower school I remember asking my parents for wife beaters aka sleeveless undershirts because I thought they'd make me look cool. My dad pulled me aside and explained to me that I shouldn't say that because there are women out there who have been abused and using that term could make them uncomfortable. I looked at mom and said, really? It's just a name for a shirt. I was met with an uncomfortable stare from her. It wasn't until a few years later that I was made aware that my dad was not my biological father, but a great man my mother met when I was a toddler. My biological father was an extremely abusive alcoholic, and my mother had to escape with me before I was even a year old. Frick the other dude. Dad refers to the man who raised you. Your dad is awesome. My abuse counselor had these 2 big plastic bins full of wet and dry sand in his office. Every session he would lock the door and tell me, pretend you're at the beach. You've got to take your shirt off at the beach. So I would and he'd give me a massage, which hurt because I was 6 and had no muscles to massage. It never went any further than that, but there was another counselor who would hide X-Men trading cards in his pockets and he would have me look for them. It's kind of messed up that these guys were abuse counselors. And maybe they still are. This was 23 years ago. I had just learned about HIV/AIDS in elementary school, and that it was a sexually transmitted disease. I was terrified if my parents had sex they would contract HIV and then die, so I literally tried to cockblock them by asking to sleep in their room every night for a week. Eventually my dad was like, WTF, and I came clean. A good laugh was had by all. I never understood that not everyone had people drop bags of groceries on their steps, while the people just rang the bell and drove away. Dawned on me as an adult that we were poor. Then I looked back at old pics and noticed all the signs. Tiny Christmas tree in the background. Disappointed faces on Christmas pics. No vacation pictures. Damn it. I'm gonna try to avoid having my kids live that way. The other part of that is I didn't realize how stressed my mom always was until I got older and realized not everyone's parents freaked out weekly and slammed doors and peeled off in their car leaving their kids alone and scared. I specifically remember one incident where my mom, brother and I went to the grocery store and while we were walking to the car my mom dropped the gallon of milk and it exploded all over the ground. My mom started crying and my brother said, "Don't cry over split milk, mom," kinda chuckling. I didn't understand at all. Now looking back it hurts me to think how hard my mom was trying to keep everything together. She passed away at age 51 when I was 18. She had a rough adulthood. I live my life now hoping to become what she wanted me to be. She made tons of mistakes but she was there for me on her own and she tried so hard. All you teens, take notice of how your parents act when they think you're not looking. You might be surprised to find they are very stressed and working super hard to make you happy, oftentimes with only frustration to show for it. I was cleaning chickens with my grandparents when I was a kid, probably about 10 years old. I was pulling out the insides and I found what I thought were 2 eggs that were growing inside the chicken. I got all excited and showed my grandma and told my mom about it when she picked me up. I noticed that they both had smirks that seemed odd when I told them about it. Years later I thought back about that time and realized that it was a rooster and those were his balls. Accidentally came across a pee video when I was just a 7-year-old boy. I couldn't understand why the girl was moaning and screaming. I thought she was in pain. For many years I thought sex was a physically painful act for girls and felt sorry for them that they had to put up with it. I'm a male and I always wanted to pee out my butt like my mom did. One day I finally did it. I was later informed that it was diarrhea. Clearly you couldn't see the crap. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.